Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to help keep dogs out of shelters by educating and supporting their humans. We promote positive method of training and behavior modification through stress-free methods. As part of that mission, we offer free webinars like the one you're about to watch. Subjects range from dog behavior, stress-free training, and other tools to help you understand your relationship with your dog. If you like the webinar, be sure to give us a thumbs up. Click the notification bell and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be notified when future videos are posted. Now enjoy the webinar.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, On the Road with Your Pup, sponsored by Your Dog's Friend, a nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to help keep dogs out of shelters by educating and supporting their humans. Since 2006, we've been promoting the use of positive dog training methods by hosting free webinars like this one, posting valuable resources on our website, offering affordable training classes in person and online, and providing free advice and referrals. My name is Kerrie Hoar, and I'm a volunteer with Your Dog's Friend, and I will be your host and speaker for today's webinar. So to introduce myself, I am the owner of Crimson Hound LLC, located in La Crosse, Wisconsin. I'm a certified dog behavior consultant and certified and accredited professional dog trainer and a fear-free certified professional. I specialize in dogs who are fearful and anxious and those who struggle with big emotions. I have 3 dogs of my own and have extensive experience in car travel with them. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit, so if you find this webinar helpful, please consider making a donation to help support these free webinars and other free resources that we offer. If you would like to donate, you can visit our website at yourdogsfriend.org and click on the donate button in the upper right-hand corner. We really appreciate your support. So, on the road with your pup. I've already introduced myself. This is a picture of me with my dog Finn, who I lost about a year ago, and he was probably one of the best travel companions I could have wished for car rides. But I've got a little bit of statistics that I found interesting. The American Pet Products Association does an annual survey of pet owners, and the results of their 2020 survey showed that 88% of dog owners who completed the survey and 90% of cat owners traveled at least one time with their dog or cat in the car in the last year, which may be just a trip to the vet. But the interesting one is 68% of dog owners and 80% of cat owners traveled at least once in the last year by air. A much smaller percentage, you can see about 22% of both dog and cat owners have traveled more than 3 times by air, and only in the 30% more than 3 times by car. So for me, before making too many plans for a trip, the first question that I really recommend to my clients that they really think about is, should you take your dog along or should you leave him at home? And so a couple of questions to ask yourself. Is it in your dog's best interest to travel? So think about their health. If your dog is pregnant, if it's in heat, sick, injured, recovering from surgery, chronic pain, some other medical issue, is it best for them to be traveling? Age, puppies, especially those that are not fully vaccinated, because they simply are not going to be able to get down and move around as much. Senior dogs, any dogs that are starting to have going blind or deaf, are going to struggle on trips. Brachycephalic breeds, they're prone to respiratory distress anyway, but if we start adding hiking, exercise, small spaces, less ventilation, they're going to start to struggle more. And then think to yourself, is it a you thing? Right? So if your dog is not going to be truly an active part of your vacation and is really going to fully enjoy the trip, is it just you wanting to take them along for comfort, or maybe you think they won't want to be away from you or something? But generally, dogs like routine, they like scheduling, and they like to stay home alone. So I would bend to the side of, unless you really have planned that trip around your dog and your dog is really going to enjoy it, I tend to leave my dog at home. Other things to think about: does your dog struggle with novelty? So anxious and fearful dogs, dogs with noise phobias, dogs that might be prone to biting or running when they're afraid or stressed, dogs that are in general excessively vocal, dogs that have separation anxiety, dogs that aren't sure about new places and environments, If your dog doesn't like to go in the car, if your dog gets motion sick, if he gets motion sickness in the car, he's going to get motion sick on any mode of transport. Does he like to be in a crate, or is he crate trained? Does he like to be restrained? So think about the amount of time your dog is going to need to spend in a crate or restrained in a vehicle, in a cargo hold, etc. Does your dog enjoy busy crowds? Does he enjoy a lot of people? Whether or not you're going to a quiet spot, he's still going to encounter that in some areas on your trip. And does your dog have skills? Does he have a good recall? Does he have good basic manners? Is he human or dog reactive? Think about your destination and the things that you're going to be doing. Does your dog like hiking, walking? What about the climate? Is your dog short-coated, living in Florida, and you're thinking about going somewhere very cold for a couple of weeks? Is he going to be able to, or have struggle with being left alone while you're on your trip? And then once you've kind of decided, okay, I want to take my dog, then you need to start looking for places that will accommodate your dog and itineraries that will accommodate your dog. So thinking about if you're traveling to a relative, a friend, a sibling, is your host going to be able or willing to accommodate your pet while you're staying there? So ask, don't just assume. Don't take it personal if they say no. Be flexible and be realistic. So it's really easy to just assume that a parent or sibling is going to be ready and willing to have you stay with them at any time with all of your pets. But you really need to have an honest conversation and tell them to be honest with you. So some things to think about. Does your host have a dog who struggles with people or other dogs, or does your dog struggle with it? Are you going to need to keep the dog separated for safety? Is your dog going to spend most of his time in a separate room or in a crate? If you're having to manage like that, the more people involved, the bigger chance is that management is going to fail. And if there are kids there, the probability goes up significantly when there are kids in the mix that management is going to fail at some point. Does someone have allergies? Is there enough space to accommodate everyone? If you're going to stay with someone with a St. Bernard in their studio apartment, is there simply enough space? Does your puppy or dog struggle with having accidents in the home? Is that going to be an issue? Is your dog crate trained, or did you just plan to let him have the run of the space when you're away? And if so, does your dog struggle with chewing or destructive behavior? And is this going to be an issue? So there really is kind of a limit to how much safety proofing you can expect your host to do to accommodate your dog. Just a quick story about that. The first time I took my Greyhound out to see my parents, they have a kind of a greenhouse sunroom with a lot of geraniums and stuff in it, nothing totally toxic. But I'm used to bringing other dogs who don't pay any attention to the plants in the house. Never thought of it, went out to dinner. We came back, and the Greyhound, who had never really learned what to pick up off the ground, she just, when she sees my dogs eating grass, she'll go grab anything green, and I have to tell her not to. She went out into the sunroom and sampled a whole bunch of geraniums, and it made her sick to her stomach, and she threw up all over the house. There is that. How about, does your dog have separation anxiety? Does your host have small pets, right? Cats, guinea pigs, bunnies, hamsters. If your dog has high prey drive or really shows too much interest in small critters, make sure you know how to keep those animals safe, because you don't want your nephew's gerbil to be eaten during the Christmas holidays, right? If you're planning on going on outings and day trips and assume your host is going to dog sit for you, make that assumption perfectly clear and be understanding if they say, no, I can't do that. Do they have a fenced yard? Is it high enough? Is it strong enough? Is it in good repair? What is your plan if there's no fence, right? Are you staying in a pet-friendly hotel, B&B, or rental? What does pet-friendly mean, right? There's generally breed restrictions. There's almost always size restrictions and a number of pets restrictions. So it could be like no more than 2 dogs that weigh 50 pounds together, something like that. Do you have a crate with you, or does the accommodation have crates that you can borrow or rent? What are the room rules? Is there a quiet time policy? What are you going to do if your dog's barking? What is the policy on leaving your dog in the room alone? I mean, that's really going to constrict you if you can't leave the dog in your room alone. Does the accommodation have, or could they recommend a pet sitter if that's the case? Where is your accommodation located? So if you have a dog that has noise phobia, you probably don't want to be staying right on Madison Square Garden, for example. If you're planning a pet-friendly itinerary, do you have a backup plan if something goes wrong? If you're joining a touring group for any part of your trip, be sure that you research all this stuff for any part of the itinerary that they're planning for you. Are you camping or renting a cabin? Be sure you know the policies for that location you're staying in, along with the locations that you're planning to visit. So what if you're planning to visit a national park or state park and do a bunch of camping? Well, keep in mind, most national parks only allow pets on a leash in the main parking lots. They are not allowed on most trails, wilderness areas, or at the attractions. So if you go to Yellowstone to watch Old Faithful go off and you have to wait for an hour, your cat or dog is not allowed on the boardwalk or anywhere else. They can be in the parking lot on a leash. That's it. State parks are somewhat more accommodating, but be sure you check each one of them. Even if dogs are allowed, is it safe for your dog, right? Is he fit for hiking? Is it safe to leave him in your tent while you're gone? If you're going to be hiking in high areas, is he safe on a cliff, or is he going to just run off on the end of your leash and fall off a cliff? And, there you have it. So things to think about. So you've decided you're going to go full steam ahead. Now we're going to look at kind of things to do before you decide to travel. Plan ahead, first things first. We're going to need to look at locations, stopovers, etc. We're going to need to look if there's paperwork required, identification. We're going to need to see our veterinarian. We're going to need to look at medications that our dog is taking, reservations for any travel modes and accommodations. There may be some training we need to do before we go. We need to know what to pack. And if you're wondering about all that stuff, AAA does have a pet book that they put out annually that you can get at their locations. Be sure you get the current year, but they usually have some pretty good and pretty up-to-date information in those. So plan ahead, choose your destination. Once you've chosen your destination, then decide how you're going to get there, right? And how are you going to get around once you are there? So you want to map out your route. If you're going to drive or fly or whatever, how are you going to get to the plane? How are you going to get to the hotel? Where are you going to stop over at night on the map? You're going to want to check the weather along your route and your destination. I would suggest checking that right up until the very end, because if you need to change your route because of weather, you're going to need to look at all those things over again. You're going to want to plan your stops, right? You're going to want to make reservations wherever you're going to go so that you get there ahead of time and your pet's going to be accepted and they know you're coming. Even if you have to stop earlier in the day than you planned, go to the hotel that you planned on because you're going to get in there. Think about breed restrictions. So breed restrictions count for whatever location you're in. So whether you stop there for gas, stop there for the rest area, or stay overnight, or that's your destination, you are bound by restrictions for that place. So paperwork policies, vaccination policies, and breed restriction policies. So make sure you know that before you go, because you would hate to have your dog confiscated because you stopped for gas in the wrong place because they have breed restrictions. So if you have a dog that has prone to have breed restrictions, do a lot of checking before you travel. Make sure that you know where there's a veterinarian, wherever you're going to be, and a couple of spots on your way. The American Animal Hospital Association, the AAHA, does have a search function on their website. So AAHA.org, you can put in some different places and they'll find you a vet. Check out the transportation. Are dogs allowed on all modes of transportation that you're planning to use? So airplanes, cars, and then once you get there, rental cars, trains, buses, shuttles, taxis, subway, tour buses. You got to check all that out. You don't want to be there and discover your pet's not allowed anywhere. You might check out your pet insurance. Some of them cover accidents. The other thing to think about, if your pet gets injured or sick on your trip, your pet insurance may have restrictions on who you can go to, etc. Similar to human insurance. If you are going to like a friend's place, or like when I go to my parents' place, I'll stay for a couple of weeks. With 4 dogs when I was traveling, all larger dogs, I usually went through quite a bit of dog food. So you could have some of that stuff shipped ahead of time, right? So I would have a big bag of dog food shipped. I have crates that I have shipped long ago. So if I need crates, they're already there. I have gates and X pens already there. So you can have some of those things shipped ahead. So you don't need to like rely on or expect your relatives go out and do that for you. If you're thinking about dog food, how are you going to transport it? Kibble's pretty straightforward, and you can have a bag mailed. If your dog is on a special type of kibble, you might want to consider if you can get that at the place that you're going, if you run out. Canned food, if you're feeding small cans, pretty easy to carry in your car or whatever, but if you've got big cans and a big dog, you might want to think about that. The main ones to think about is, what if your dog is on a raw diet or a home cooked diet? How are you going to transport that? Do you have refrigeration or ways to keep things frozen in the car and at your destination? If not, you might consider using dehydrated food for travel if you really want to stick with that and not go to kibble. Dehydrated food comes dehydrated and just pour water on it to feed. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to switch out things for your trip, make sure your dog likes it and make sure he can tolerate it. So test this out prior to your trip. The last thing you want is a dog that is sick to their stomach on a trip. Thinking about required paperwork, do not put this off at all. Requirements, especially if you're doing international destinations, can take as long as 6 months to get through all the paperwork requirements to be able to take your pet along with you. So make sure you start right away. Universally, you're probably going to need some kind of a health certificate. Even if you're just traveling with your own dog across state lines, you are technically supposed to have a health certificate with you. So I live right on the Mississippi River, and I often travel to the other side of the Mississippi River to train dogs or work with the shelter. If I were to take my dog across there, technically, I could be ticketed or my dog could be confiscated if I didn't have a health certificate, right? And so a lot of that stuff is implemented, but you always want to play it safe when you're actually traveling on a long distance. So think about getting a health certificate. It's going to at minimum need to be signed by your vet. Some places are going to require to be signed by a USDA or a federally accredited veterinarian. Not all vets are accredited. So if yours isn't, ask them if they know someone local who is. You can also check the USDA website for a list, but you may have to travel to get that health certificate. You're going to need a rabies certificate. The tags on the collar do not work as proof of rabies vaccination. They figure you could put tags on any collar. So you have to have the rabies certificate, and it has to be a proper rabies certificate. It has to be signed by your vet. To the extent that when I was researching for this, there are places that require you to have the original piece of paper that was signed in ink by your veterinarian. Okay. Thinking about vaccination, some countries will not accept a 3-year rabies. They require the annual, and they will not accept titers. So think about those things. Requirements that you must fulfill depend on your port of entry. Okay, so whether that is the city that you're passing into, the state or the country that is your destination, or whether you're just passing through there to get to your next destination. So if I'm going to Montana with my dogs and I leave Wisconsin, I have to abide by the requirements of Minnesota, South Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana. Okay, and if I have to vary my route, which I have had to do during the winter, Nebraska would also be included. North Dakota would be included in sometimes. So make sure that you make plans. Again, if you're stopped over for gas, food, layovers, overnights, it all counts. You have to have the paperwork and the vaccinations. Some countries require additional vaccinations. Some require parasite treatment. Some require your health certificate to be endorsed, which is a multiple step process. So make sure you start early again. Some places require microchipping. Some places require COVID-19 testing. If we're just thinking about interstate travel, Hawaii, for one, has a 120-day quarantine requirement for any dogs, regardless of where they're coming from, even if you're coming from the States. So thinking about quarantine requirements. Customs can restrict dog food in your luggage. So have that, have a backup plan in mind for that. If you're traveling to the EU and you're going to be traveling around, there is a thing called an EU passport that allows you to do that with your dog without continuing to get things checked over again. You can't get that in the US. So once you get to the UK or wherever, you can do that. So as you're planning, check out the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service website. They've got requirements for all states listed by state. They've got requirements for countries listed by country. So that's a good one to look at. CDC is another good one to check out. They cover all pets leaving and entering the US. So there are restrictions for dogs coming back to the US. If you're traveling internationally, make sure that you verify requirements with the consulate or the embassy, because sometimes websites aren't up to date. Check with your transportation service to make sure that your animal is able to fly and that you have the extra equipment. For instance, if you're traveling airlines and cargo, you may need what's called an acclimation certificate from your vet to travel. In general, airlines will only fly pets and cargo if it's between 45 and 85 degrees. If it's going to be less than 45 degrees at any part of the trip, you need to have an acclimation certificate. Okay. Again, reentry requirements for travel are going to be the same if you spent 2 days in the UK or if you adopted a dog from overseas, right? They have to appear healthy when they come back. So if your dog gets sick on travel, he's not going to be let back in until he's healthy. The rabies certificate is required regardless of the status of the dog. And then depending on where you're coming from, you may need additional certifications and stuff depending on what country you're coming from. If there's countries that are affected by foot and mouth disease and screwworms, those are, more things you have to think about. So lots of stuff to think about as you're traveling. All right, identification. Do not want your dog to get lost. So if he does, you want everything in place. Bring a current photo of your dog, one that shows his whole body. If he has unique markings, scars, tattoos, etc., get photos of everything. Make sure that your contact information on your dog's regular ID tags are up to date. You want to make sure there are ID tags on his collar, his harness, the carrier, everything that might be attached to that dog. I would get travel ID tags. They don't need to be anything fancy, right? This little dog on top is a transport dog that I moved. And this is just a piece of cardstock that we printed out the information on. And then we wrapped it multiple times with clear packing tape to make it nice and sturdy. And then we punched a hole in it and attached it to the collar with a zip tie. You can also print out that information and actually use packing tape to actually tape it right onto their collar. But make sure that this tag has your current contact information, and it also has the contact information for the accommodations where you're staying. You want to get your dog microchipped. If he's already microchipped, double check to make sure it's registered and that your contact information is up to date. Finally, if your dog is traveling in a crate, make sure that your contact information is actually written on the crate in permanent marker, and that you also have live animal on all sides of the crate. Those are requirements of dogs traveling by crate and cargo. Now you know what the requirements are, so you're going to go see your vet. Again, don't procrastinate, right? You need to have enough time to do everything. You want to get a health check. You want to talk to your vet about everywhere where you're traveling, what the paperwork is. There may need to be extra vaccinations that are required. Your vet might recommend something more. For instance, if you're traveling and planning on doing a bunch of hiking where there's a lot of rattlesnakes, maybe you want to talk to your vet about getting the rattlesnake vaccination. And then if your vet tells you that they don't really think it's a good fit for your pet to travel, then take that, to heart and be realistic about it. They're not being mean. They only have your pet's health and welfare in mind. So when they're telling you that, so really take that to heart. So you're going to need that health certificate. Generally includes a heartworm check. If your dog ends up being heartworm positive, you're not going to be able to travel until that's treated. Again, if you need to endorse that health certificates, there's more steps. So don't wait till the last minute. Be sure he's up to date on all of his vaccinations. Discuss that acclimation certificate if you're going to be doing cargo. And then if you've got medications, make sure you have enough medication for travel. Plus, I would say an extra week in case you need to stay longer. plans happen. But also make sure that you've got a copy of all the prescriptions in case you need to have them refilled while you're on your trip. Ask about medication for travel, like if your dog has motion sickness, if he's anxious, if you're flying, what can your dog take when they're flying? Because drugs react differently with dogs when they're stressed. If your dog isn't microchipped, get him microchipped. You might want to ask your vet to scan for the current chip just to make sure it's working. And then get a current copy of your dog's most recent medical records that include current and pre-existing conditions in case you need to see a vet while you're gone. And again, get those copies of your prescriptions in case you need them. Proof of vaccination for rabies needs to be on an official form with the vet's letterhead. It has to include date administered, how long the vaccination is valid, the product's name, the lot number, your name and address. And that has to be there. Again, a collar tag doesn't count. Medications, just keep in mind that you've got enough medications to travel. And think about seasonal things. So if your dog has seasonal allergies, or if you're going to be around fleas and ticks, and normally you don't give those things, at certain times of the year. If my dog has summer allergies and I'm going from Wisconsin to Florida in the middle of the winter, I probably want to make sure I've got allergy medication with me just in case. Accommodations, again, remember to look for pet-friendly accommodations and locations. Again, check out the restrictions for breed, size, and number. They usually have special rooms set aside for pets. They charge a cleaning fee, could be up to $200 per pet. And thinking about checking out the pet policies. So exercise and potty spaces, quiet time, what spaces in the hotel are accessible to dogs. Because if you're going to go get continental breakfast, your dog's probably not going to be allowed down there. Do they provide crates or rent crates? Are they allowed on the hotel shuttle to get you from the airport to the hotel? Does the pet policy allow you to leave your dog unattended in your room? If not, maybe look for a different place. But if you can't find another place, look for a room that has a kitchenette or room service, or plan to get takeout and eat in your room. But traveling with a kitchenette and just bringing food with you or buying groceries, it may be what you need to do. If they do allow, make sure you've got a crate. When you do leave, make sure you let the front desk know that you're leaving. Make sure that they have your contact information so they can get a hold of you if something happens. And put a do not disturb sign on your door so that the maid service isn't coming in while your dog's in there alone, especially if they kind of have some stranger danger. And again, even if your dog is great in a crate and you have all this planned out, what is your backup plan if your dog is suddenly struggling with being left alone in this new scary space, right? If he has separation anxiety, it's going to make it even, more likely that this might happen. And then again, if you're taking a tour, once you arrive at your destination, what are going to be all the pet policies regarding that? You may need to look for a pet sitter to come and stay with your pet in the hotel while you do day trips, for example. How about training that you might need to do? Again, plan ahead, because you can't crate train a dog overnight if they've never been in a crate before. So you may need to do some desensitizing or some training prior to your trip. So things kind of I'm thinking of are like crate training and restraint in cars. If your dog's never been in a crate in the car and you suddenly pop them in a crate to travel, they're not going to be happy. So you're going to need to work on that. Practice car trips, do some practice runs. If you've got any gear that you're taking, so coats, booties, life jacket, muzzle, I recommend all dogs are muzzle trained and take a muzzle with you on your trip just in case. You never know when you're going to need a crate or a muzzle in your dog's life. And it's almost always in a situation where it's stressful anyway, and you don't want to put a muzzle on the dog and pop him in a crate in the most stressful of times, because that's just going to make things go way out of whack. And then, so all these things you're going to need to acclimate prior to travel, so he's comfortable with all those things when you go. And then thinking of kind of behavior skills, like, is he good on a leash? Does he know how to do polite greetings, or is he going to be jumping on every single person that he sees as I'm walking down the street or through the hotel? Does he have reactivity towards humans or dogs? You're going to have to work on that if you're going to take that dog anywhere. And is he fearful or anxious? And again, if reactivity and fearful and anxiousness requires a lot of training, and you absolutely, if you absolutely have to travel with that dog, that's one thing. But if you have the opportunity to leave them home, and these are the things that they're struggling with, it's almost always best practice to just leave that dog at home. And so just reduce the amount of stress in their life. You're going on vacation to reduce your stress. And if you bring it on a dog who's highly stressed, you're not going to have a relaxing vacation, and neither is your dog. Things to pack, you can get these lists online anywhere, but think about your medication, identification, medical records, paperwork that you need, obviously food, extra water, bowls. You may think about collapsible depending on what mode of travel you're taking. Treats, don't force your dogs into the car or into the crate. Use treats to get them in there. Reward them for good behavior. Dog waste bags, obviously, but you may need things like potty pads, belly bands, diapers. If your dog isn't house trained, if he has occasional accidents, or if you're on public transit, they're not going to think highly of you if your dog pees on the floor in the airplane, right? Cleaning supplies, you're going to need that if you need to clean anything up, whether it's car, airplane, whatever. Crates and carriers, we'll cover that in just a few minutes. Car harnesses, if you're not using a crate, look for brands that have been crash tested. You're going to want to bring along an extra harness, collar, and extra leash, and think about bringing on a long line. So if you do go hiking somewhere, you can let your dog roam, but still keep him safe on leash. Again, never use a collar when you're restraining the dog. We're going to want you to double leash for safety, and I'll talk about that in a minute and why we do that. Think about comfort items, dog bed, blankets, dog toy. If your little dog has a huge stuffed toy that's their absolute favorite thing in the world and they can't sleep without it, if it's not going to fit in the carrier, what are you going to do on the plane? Crate covers. So maybe bring a sheet along just in case you need to cover the crate to just kind of slow down the amount of stimulus the dog is getting in the car. A muzzle, already mentioned that. Any special gear. Calming aids, thunder cap, thunder shirt, goggles, the dog eye goggles, ear guards, music, pheromones, lavender. And again, if your dog is at the point where all these things are needed to help him travel, just travel a place for your dog. Mental enrichment, physical enrichment, we'll talk about that in a minute. Toys, we'll talk about in a minute. And then a pet first aid kit. So, thinking about crates and carriers to bring on your trip, you're going to want to keep comfort, safety, and regulations in mind. And think about the fact that what you gain in safety, you're going to sacrifice in convenience, and vice versa, right? So what style are you going to choose? There's basically 4 styles. There's wire crates, airline crates, impact crates, and soft-sided crates. Those are the 4 most common ones that are transportable. Wire crates, those are the ones that are like this dog door are wire. The entire crate's made out of wire. Pros, they fold up easily for space and transport. They provide the best amount of ventilation and visibility if that's what your dog needs. Cons, they are not safe for vehicle travel. They do not stand up to crash safety tests. They are not as warm. So if you are traveling in winter, you're going to want to cover those with a blanket or have some nice cozy blankets inside. And if your dog doesn't like or shouldn't have a lot of visibility, they may have too much visibility for a dog that's fearful or reactive. Plus, they're not approved for cargo. And as a transporter, they are not approved for dogs with motion sickness. They do not contain anything that comes out of that dog if they are sick in the car. Airline crates, which is what this little dog on the top is in. These are the ones made out of rigid plastic or sometimes fiberglass. Pros, they are approved for cargo and they have less visibility. Cons, they take up more space because they don't break down as easily. They have less ventilation and visibility, which again, those 2 things could be a pro or a con depending on, well, not ventilation, but the visibility, depending on your dog. They are not car crash safety approved. If you want something that is car crash safety approved, you're going to go to an impact crate. Those ones are car crash test approved, but they are very heavy. They take a lot more space. They are not collapsible, so they're less transportable. And they obviously would need to have a bit less ventilation and visibility in order to be extra safe. And then finally, we have the soft-sided crates and carriers. Pros, they're light, they're easy to carry, they take up less space, they're easy to fold up, etc. They do, however, that nylon mesh does have less ventilation. They're a lot easier to chew up and escape from if your dog does that. They are not vehicle safe, but they are airline approved in the size required, but they are not waterproof. So if you are using them on public transportation, make sure you've got potty pads in there. Following requirements. So traveling in cargo, they have to be in plastic, fiberglass, or wood. You have to label it. There has to be ventilation. They have to be leak proof and escape proof. Think about what you want to put in there. You know, you want to have a mat and bedding, potty pads, waste bags, cleanup supplies, food and water. If you're traveling by car or RV, take along whatever you want for bowls and food. If you're using public transport, you might want to think about collapsible bowls. Those are going to be the most convenient. If you're shipping in cargo, food and water containers have to be attached on the inside so they move around. And they also have to be accessible and fillable from the outside. So not everything is going to work. You're going to have to think about that ahead of time. Thinking about crate size. This website up here on the top, the IATA, that's where I got this diagram from. They've got a lot of great information on flying dogs in cargo and cabin. But the Animal Welfare Act requires that a dog in a crate or a carrier has to be able to sit up, stand, lie down, and turn around comfortably. And when they talk about standing up, if your dog has upright ears, their ears cannot be touching the top of the crate. They have to have space between the tip of their ears and the top of the crate. If your dog is flying in the cabin, the carrier has to fit under the seat in front of you. In general, the big three airlines, so United, American, and Delta, the 18 by 11 by 11, which are the general size for the ones that are airport approved, those ones will fit under the crate or under the seat. But if you're flying a different airline, make sure you check, because I looked at a couple and they had significantly smaller sizes that were able to accommodate. So that's going to affect the size of the dog that you can take. So you're going to need to measure your dog on all sizes and then do some calculations to figure out which size crate that you're going to need. Then we've got double leashing. So this is something that if you have a dog that doesn't have a good recall, if they're fearful or reactive and they might run off, even just any dog that's in a space that they don't know, double leashing is really important for safety. And what I don't mean is what I have up here on my Greyhound in the top. She's got a collar that's too loose. It's going to slip right over the top of her head. And I've got two leashes, double leashing, right? But they're both attached to a collar. And as soon as that slides off her head, now I'm standing here holding two leashes and empty collar. So that means that you have two leashes attached to two separate attachment points on the dog. And so in this case with double leashing, this is absolutely the only time that I would ever recommend putting a slip lead on your dog. If you need to use that because you don't have another method of double leashing. There are lots of other ways to do it, but 2 points of attachment means I've got a leash, in this case, attached to the collar and attached to a slip lead on the dog. To replace that, we could use a martingale collar, which are the ones that they call half slip, that have the 2 rings and they only tighten to a certain point, but they then will tighten enough that they won't slide over the head like these kind of regular flat collars do. This is also double leashing with the collar, or the leashes attached to the collar and the harness, or in this case, we've got a collar attached to the harness and a slip lead. So I would use this. I use this with my dogs every time I travel and we take potty breaks. My dogs are double leashed. And I've been traveling with them on the same route with my oldest dog for 14 years, and I still double leash every single time she gets out of the car. First aid kit, you can find these lists everywhere, but in general, emergency contacts. Get a first aid guide if you're not sure how to use everything. Make sure you've got bandaging and materials to stop blood flow, things to help flush out wounds and clean out wounds, like your solution and your tweezers, hydrogen peroxide if it's recommended that you try to make the dog throw up. You may need some disposable gloves, some antibiotic cream, styptic powder if they break a nail, that's the blood stop powder, small flashlights so you can see things pretty well, and then make sure you have the phone number for animal control with you. Enrichment, right? So dogs are going to get bored on the trip, just like we get bored on a trip and our kids get bored on a trip. They got to have something to do. And if they're stuck in a crate for 8 hours in the day before you get somewhere where they can play, they are going to be bored out of their gourd. So we're going to need to be able to pack in some physical enrichment when you're on the road and you make some stops. And we're going to need to pack in some mental enrichment when we are at our destination and when we're in the car and they're traveling. So think in terms that you can pack things that are small that you can do in a smaller space, and things that you can fit into a smaller space, or things that are already accessible to you. So for instance, when you stop at a rest area, there's going to be a lot of sniffing that they can do, whether it's just in the parking lot, right along the sidewalk, whatever, lots of new smells. So definitely a sniff walk. You might even find a trail or two that you could take. Swimming or playing in the water, depending on where you are. Fetch is a good one. You can do this with a long line if you practice and you don't, practice throwing and stuff. Flirt pole. So what we're doing here with that, chasing the toy at the end of the pole. These ones do come in like a telescoping pole. So I've got one that I can fit into a backpack to take with me to show clients. You can fit that into a suitcase really easily. Tug toys, a smaller tug toy can fit right into a suitcase. 5-10 minutes of tug is a great, easy activity to do with a dog in a small space and tire them out a bit. Again, we mentioned hiking. Sniff spot. Check out Sniff Spot. There are places all over the country. There's places in Canada. So you might find a spot like that you can stop at. And then consider a dog walker. If you get to your destination and you find out that you're not going to be able to exercise your dog like you thought you were going to be able to, maybe the hotel knows of a dog walker, or maybe they have a dog walker that you can use. But again, if you during your plans, part of your plan is hiring a dog walker, then maybe leaving your dog at home with a pet sitter would be a better plan. Thinking about mental enrichment. So thinking about things that are easy to do in the car, in a small space, and thinking about things that are less ingestible, or remember that if it is ingestible, that you don't leave it in the crate with your dog all day. Think in terms of sniffing, chewing, and licking. Because those are the three things that really help a dog with calming. So snuffle mat, absolutely fantastic, totally portable. If the snuffle mat is too big, you can make a smaller one, or you can get a snuffle ball, right? That could fit in a crate. Topple, Kong, and these popsicles make toys that you can stuff with food, so you can feed them their lunch, dinner, whatever in those. A licky mat, so that's what we have over here. You could attach those to the inside of the crate, or if you think your dog's going to chew, you could actually attach that to the outside of the crate door with a couple of zip ties, and then they can lick through the crate door, but not be able to get a hold of the licky mat to chew it up. If they are a chewer, you could use a licky wall. You could smear stuff on the inside of the crate wall. If you are traveling with a small carrier and you need something for long lasting, you might use like a small snuffle ball, or you can get coasters that are silicone and have these same patterns. I've got some for cat training that are really small, like 3 inches diameter, and those fit great in a small carrier. Think in terms of long-lasting chews, so bully sticks, antlers, hooves. Think in terms of, and also Benabones, those kinds of things. Think in terms of if you're going to put that dog like in cargo or in the back of your car where you're not going to have eyes on. Make sure that it's not something that they're going to get to the bottom of and ingest, or small pieces are going to break off of, or get a toy like this one that is actually a chew stick holder, as well as you can fit some kibble in there. Let's see, treat balls. There are some smaller treat balls or Kong wobblers that will fit in a crate you can use, or use in a hotel room in a small space. Some of the puzzles are pretty easily stackable and small, so you could put one of those in your suitcase. Scatter feeding, so throwing food around in your hotel room or outside. Just make sure that you're okay with the surface that the dog is actually eating food off of. Towel games, so bring along a towel or a hand towel, lay it out flat, scatter some treats on it, and you can either fold it, you can scrunch it up, or you can roll it up like I've done here into kind of a burrito. Give them a little activity. Totally easy to pack a towel. Toilet paper tubes, paper towel tubes. You can make little treat parcels out of those. So you fold one end, put in a few treats or some kibble, fold the other end, give it to them to rip apart. Gives them a little activity. These are easy to transport because you can flatten them in your suitcase and then pull out a couple, make them round again, and then make them into a little parcel. And then nose work and free work are two things that you can do anywhere. You can do that a little bit of nose work while you're at a pit stop, in your hotel room, all kinds of places. Free work is basically where you're taking a whole bunch of different things. Like you could take one of each of these items and fill them with a little bit of kibble and put them around different places in your hotel room and just let your dog walk around slowly and sniffle and snuffle and look for food and kind of unroll things and work on the chew toy, things like that. So those are some good enrichment things that you can do on a trip. So quickly going through kind of modes of transport. If you're going to include boats, make sure you've got the dog is familiar with it. He's done it before. Make sure he's wearing a life jacket. Do you need a ramp? In the summer heat, do you need sunscreen? Thinking about hot surfaces. So thinking about bringing along yoga mats, non-slip bath mats that you can put on the dock or on the floor of your boat so they don't burn their pads. Leashes and carriers so he doesn't jump out. And then if you're going for a lengthy trip, you need to have a place for him to go potty on that boat. Cruise lines, generally no. There's an exception if you're going across the Atlantic. Quite expensive, but that's the only cruise option I could find. Service animals can go on cruise ships. Just make sure you know what the rules are. Bus and rail, thinking of like interstate. No dogs on Greyhound buses other than service dogs. Amtrak will allow one dog up to 20 pounds on most of their routes, has to be in a carrier under your seat at all times. There are car restrictions. So if you're planning on eating on the train or using the sleeper car and you have a dog, not going to work because they're not allowed on first class, not allowed in sleepers, not allowed in quiet cars, not allowed in the dining cars. In addition to that, when you're planning out your trip, the entire trip is restricted to less than 7 hours total. That includes all of your transfers. So you need to keep that in mind. If your trip's going to be longer than 7 hours, the dog is not allowed. As with any mode of transportation, call ahead, make reservations. Most of them are limited to the total number of animals allowed on a flight or on a train. It's first come, first serve. So if your dog it doesn't have reservations, but you have a ticket, your dog may not get on if there's already too many dogs. Trains in Europe, I find, are much less restrictive, but check into those. Anything local, you're going to need to check into their policies. So taxis, buses, Ubers, trains, subways, light rail, you're going to check all of those before you travel. If we're traveling by air, remember required paperwork, health certificate, that acclimation certificate. Again, call ahead and make reservations. Try to avoid long layovers. Try to get nonstop flights. Try to avoid flight changes. Avoid busy holidays. They do have breed restrictions. No brachiocephalic, the snub-nosed dogs are allowed in cargo. They have temperature restrictions. Again, I mentioned they will only fly dogs in cargo between 45 and 85 degrees. If you're traveling in the cabin, we already talked about carrier size, so make sure you check that out. You're going to have to go through TSA, and they are going to ask you to carry the animal in your arms through the scanner while the carrier goes through the X-ray machine, and then you can put them back in the carrier. Now, make sure you practice this, because I last year traveled with my daughter's cat on a flight from New York to Wisconsin. I had a couple of stops. I had to take the cat, who doesn't generally like people she doesn't know well. She hadn't seen me for a long time. I had to hold her in my arms while I walked through the scanner. And then I had to put her back in the crate, which she did not like. And so keep those things in mind, especially if you're traveling alone. Service dogs we'll talk about in just a minute. If you're traveling by air, remember cargo. So again, no brachiocephalic dogs. You have to have crate size regulations. Feed your dog less. Make sure they're going to have water in the appropriate containers. Exercise and potty break before you put them on there. Tranquilizers and sedatives are not recommended for dogs that fly, and sometimes even dogs that travel by any mode, because stress can cause medications to react in a different way. And so anytime you're going to try a new medication before you travel, you always want to try it out at home first on some short trips. to number one, see if it works. Number two, to see if there's any side effects in case you need to change things up, right? And then finally, my own kind of preference is, do you want to send your dog in cargo? Super, super stressful, right? The cargo hold and the tarmac can get really cold or really hot depending on the day. Loading and unloading, tons of noise. Once they're in the cargo hold, they shut that door. It is pitch black. It's super noisy in there. The air circulation is going to be somewhat reduced because of all the boxes and luggage and stuff that's in there. And I just would not recommend flying a dog in cargo unless you really, really have to. And finally, keep in mind that at the moment, flying dogs in cargo is restricted to military personnel. So it's not an option for most people. Just a quick note on brachiocephalic dogs, because we bring those up all the time, the little snub-nosed dogs. Why are they, why do we hold things against them? It's basically because they have the same amount of nasal structures that we can fit in this big size nose of a normal size dog into this tiny space. And I adjusted this picture so you've got basically the same size head of these two dogs. And now we can really kind of compare more fairly the length of the nose and the amount of space you have to fit in things like the nasal cavity, the roof of the mouth, the opening of the trachea, and all that stuff. None of it is eliminated. You need all that stuff anatomically, so it's just smushed into a much smaller space. And so their nostrils are usually smaller. The back part of their palate, the real soft part, is sometimes longer, and that will collapse easier when they're breathing hard. Their trachea is often narrowed, which can also collapse when they're breathing hard. And so they just simply have respiratory problems, which are exacerbated with exercise, stress, being overheated, being overweight. And so it's really for the health and safety of the dog. Traveling with service dogs, just a very quick note, they are granted access to any public spaces, unless it's not feasible or dangerous or safety concern. Check travel policies. Other countries don't have the same laws. Some don't treat service dogs as service dogs. They treat them as pets. You need additional paperwork. Even if you're not getting off in a different country, let's say you are on a cruise with a service dog, even if you're not getting off at a port, they will come on and check paperwork. So you have to be sure that you have the right paperwork. If you are traveling on train or airplane, they're going to need to sit between your legs for the whole flight. They would prefer they don't go to the bathroom. And if if you're traveling on a 12-hour flight, are they going to have to hold it, or are you going to have to teach them how to go on a potty pad, and how are you going to manage that in a small space? Emotional support dogs, they are not service dogs. They have the same access and they're treated for travel as pet dogs. And just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? If you have an emotional support dog that you love, but it is a barky dog and it's barking on a flight and someone complains, the person affected is probably not you, but it's going to be the next service dog that tries to fly. And service dogs are there because they perform an absolute necessary job. So please don't try to pass your dog off as a service dog just to get him on a flight. Quick things on specifics. Traveling by RV, most relaxing, most like a home. Look for pet-friendly places to go. If you're going to leave them in the RV or even in your camper, make sure they're climate controlled. An Airstream with no AC in the summer is like a turkey roaster pan. Don't want to leave your dog in there. If they have separation anxiety, practice that or think about it ahead of time. If they're reactive to people, dogs, or sound, you can do some sound masking, but you may need a backup plan like a pet sitter or a dog walker, or maybe you leave your dog at home. Traveling by car, practice trips, frequent stops, having all that stuff whizzing by as you're driving along can be super stimulating, especially for like herding dogs, your border collies and stuff. So you may want to cover the crate for that. Plenty of water during the day, but super small meals so they don't get motion sickness. Watch out for signs of distress. So excessive panting, drooling, whining, lethargy. Watch out for motion sickness, symptoms if they are foaming at the mouth, if they're doing a lot of drooling, and then we go to vomiting and diarrhea, and treat that with a lot of stops and you can get medication for it. You can see your vet for medication, and then you can keep the car cooler than normal. You can cover the crate so they can only see forward, like we do with people who get motion sickness. Have some ventilation, so either open windows that blow back, or you can get a crate fan. Yeah, acclimate them. You know, that's one of the best things you can do. If they have anxiety, make sure that you have seen a vet and that you have practiced a lot with travel in your car. We talked about safety restraining, but again, make sure that you're restraining either with a safety harness or with a crate. The crate in this picture is one of those impact crates that I talked about. Don't allow your dog to be in your lap or at your feet. Don't allow them in the front passenger seat. And if you absolutely have to, make sure that you turn off the front airbag. Desensitize them to all this equipment. Make sure that your windows are closed with the child locks on, because if your dog steps on the child lock, child locks are not on and your dog steps on the window button, the window is going to come down and you're not going to be able to roll it back up if he's standing on the child lock. I have experience with that, so make sure those child locks are on. You don't want your dog to jump out or fall out accidentally. You don't want your dog hanging his head out the window, right? It seems like they love it, but they can get debris in their eyes. They can get hematomas of their ears, you know, big, basically blood blisters by their ears beating on the side of the car. They can fall out. Again, never in the back of a pickup. I grew up in a place where everybody's dog rode in the back of a pickup. If you have to do that, make sure you've got one of these super safe impact crates and that they are very secured to the base of that truck bed, but I recommend not doing that. Camping, extra supplies, thinking about bringing a long line, a crate, flea and tick preventative, some grooming supplies if you get burrs. Again, pet-friendly policies for where you're staying and where you're going to be going. Don't leave your pet alone in your tent. I would never leave a dog in a crate in a tent, even if it was a cool day. You don't know what's going to happen. Again, check out national parks and safety park requirements. There are additional things like encountering wildlife. If they chase wildlife, that's illegal. If the wildlife chases them, they're going to come and hide behind you. So if the grizzly bear is chasing your dog, where's the dog going to be when that grizzly bear approaches? Consider hunting season safety. If you're not used to hunting season, wherever you're going out in the wilderness, think about hunting season. And then private versus public lands. Make sure you know access policies for where you think you're going to go. Summer versus winter travel. A lot of this is straightforward. What do I do with my dog in the summer, right? But for in the car, you might think of a cooling mat or a cooling vest. You can do a lot of hiking, maybe some booties for rougher terrain. Make sure you've got plenty of water. Collapsible control bowl is super convenient. Make sure your dog is comfortable drinking out of that. Those material ones that just unfold, some dogs won't drink out of those. So make sure you've acclimated to that ahead of time. Remember sunscreen, misting bottles. So you may want to spray some water on your dog. Let's see, window shades for the car. Just because you have your dog in the cargo space and your car has AC on and you're nice and cool up in the front seat, it can get massively hot in the cargo space. So you might be able to do some window shades, or make sure that your AC and your ventilation is all pointing to the back of the car to make everything going to the back, or set it lower than you would like it and wear a sweatshirt so that the cool air is keeping your dog cool in the back. Surface temperatures, we talk about this all the time. Walk first thing in the morning or later in the evening if it's hot. Test the pavement beforehand, whatever surface you're going to be on. 7-second test, so either in your bare feet or the back of your hand. Hold that on the surface for 7 seconds. If it's too hot for you, it's too hot for your dog, right? And then this is just a gauge of how quickly, especially asphalt, 95 degrees, the asphalt goes up to 155. That will burn their pads almost instantly. Never leave your dog in the car during warm weather. Common sense, hopefully. Car heats up very quickly. The AVMA, the veterinarians are saying that even if you open your window a little ways, it makes no difference. Dogs can succumb to heat stroke in under 15 minutes. You know, so if you're on vacation, you have to run into the restroom or the store, either have someone stay in the car with the AC running, Better yet, multitask and you go potty and they take the dog for a walk. Or if you're alone, you're either gonna have to make it super quick, or you may think about leaving your car running with the parking brake set and the doors locked. If you don't think that's safe, then zoom in, zoom out. No quick stops, no shopping trips. Heat stroke. Signs of heat stroke: heavy panting, drooling. Their gums and tongue will get super red and almost purple. Heart rate goes up. You'll see as it goes along. These are kind of listed in as it goes along, they keep getting worse. Heart rate goes up, vomiting and diarrhea. You may see either lethargy and collapse or even restlessness or agitation. As it gets worse, seizures, and then even death. So if you see any of these early symptoms, quickly move your dog into the shade. Pour cold water over their body. Avoid pouring it on the head. You can dab or mist some cool water on their head, but don't pour it. Offer them some water. They're saying now, they used to say wet a towel and lay it on the dog, but now they're saying that holds in the heat. So you don't want to lay a blanket or a towel over the dog. You just want to keep flushing them with cool water. Continue doing that until their breathing and their heart rate comes down a bit, because then you know they're starting to cool off, and then get them to the ERs as soon as possible. The recent first aid class that I took basically said that getting their temperature down ASAP is more important than getting them to the vet. So try to get their temperature down first and then get them to that ER vet ASAP. Who's at risk? Obviously your brachycephalic dogs, dogs that are overweight, and then puppies, seniors, suppressed dogs, sick dogs. They have a harder time regulating their own body temperature. So they're all going to be more at risk, either to cold or heat. Traveling in the winter. With any trip, get your car serviced before travel. In the summer, make absolutely sure that your AC is working before you go. Make sure your heat is working in the winter. Pack an emergency snow kit, so you've got some snow gear, some blankets, some extra food. Make sure there's heat to the cargo space. You may want to think about some warm blankets and stuff for your crate. You may want to cover the crate with a blanket to hold in the heat even more, especially if it's a wire crate. Thinking about coming from a warm climate. If you live in Florida and you're going to visit family in Montana in the winter for Christmas. If you have a double-coated dog, he's probably struggles in the summer in Florida, but he probably will do great in the winter up in Montana. If you have a puppy, a thin-coated dog, a senior dog, they are going to struggle. So you're going to want to take some extra gear. You're going to want to acclimate. You want to keep your sessions short out in the cold. And again, the same as stops in the summer. You're going to want to take turns, make quick stops, use drive-throughs to grab food, and then sit in the parking lot to eat, those kinds of things. Supplies, thinking about insulated coat, booties, warm bed and blanket, some pad conditioner or wax. Musher's Secret is fabulous. Self-warming bed or a pad. Extra food takes more energy to stay warm, so they're going to want to eat more in the winter when they're cold. Again, acclimate to all those coats and booties and all that gear. You may want to let their coat grow longer if you tend to keep them groomed. You want to reduce the ice balls that form between the pads of their toes or along their legs. So you might want to trim the hair between the pads, and you might want to trim the leg fur so that they don't get a whole bunch of snowballs on their leg. Both of those can be uncomfortable. They can also hold the cold in on the dog. But this paw wax that I mentioned, Musher's Secret, if you rub that on the pads of their feet and on the fur between the toes, that really helps with not only keeping the icicles or the ice balls and stuff from forming, it also protects their feet from ice melt and stuff that's on the sidewalk. Dangers in the winter. If you're from a sunny place, you may not have thought much about water and ice. If you're camping around a lake or a river, keep your dogs out of the water and off the ice. Drowning and hypothermia are not something you want to have happen on vacation. Ice can be super sharp, so if you can do some hiking, use booties. Thinking about ice melt, if you're not used to that, regular ice melt that is really hard on the dog's feet looks like large salt crystals. If it's a round bluish pellet, those are pet-friendly types. They often use chemical ice melt on the roads, and it makes slush. And that is really hard on their feet. And then if their feet get wet on the street, then they step on the ice melt on the sidewalk, it can really burn their feet. So that paw wax can really help. You want to think about antifreeze. And thinking about that for summer and winter, because if your car is getting warm, it will drip some antifreeze even in the summer. So we're thinking of that really fluorescent like yellow-green stuff, the propylene glycol. It's sweet, so it attracts your dog to it. It tastes good, but it is highly toxic. If your dog has been around that and you're even not sure if they ingested any, get them to the vet as soon as possible. The pink antifreeze, if you've been around RVs or RV parks, this is the kind that they use to winterize. It's not toxic, but you definitely don't want your dog eating it. So beware of those. So at-risk dogs, kind of the same as ones that are more susceptible for cold, puppies, small dogs, seniors, and then your thin-coated dogs, your ones with the weakened immune system, arthritic, not acclimated to the cold, they're all going to suffer more in cold weather. Then, is my dog cold? And I'm going to play you one of my favorite videos.
Is it cold?
No, it's not cold.
Are you cold?
No, I'm not cold.
You're not cold?
No.
You want to get out?
No.
Are you cold?
That is like my favorite video on TikTok anymore. But there's a dog that's cold, right? Shivering and shaking, trying to increase his body temperature. A lot of times they'll be lifting their paws, trying to stay warm. They'll tuck their tail. A lot of times they'll whine or cry. They'll get more restless to try to move around to stay warm, or they might just curl up in a ball and just don't want to move. They might sleep more than normal. So those are signs that your dog's too cold, that you probably need to either go inside or put a coat on them. And then hypothermia and frostbite, just quick symptoms of hypothermia, shivering, shallow breathing, weakness, low blood pressure, dilated pupils, blank stare. Their gums and tongue get the opposite of hyperthermia. So when they're too hot, their gums and stuff turn purpley red. If they're too cold, they turn pale or bluish, the light pink or white or blue. Ears and paws will be cold to the touch, and their nose will be super cold because they retract, they pull in all the blood flow to the core to stay warm, and the extremities will get cold faster. And then coma is one of the final ones. If you're seeing this, get to the vet as soon as possible. Frostbite, vulnerable areas are all those extremities. Again, like I just said, they retract blood flow. And then if you've got a low rider dog, their belly's going to be exposed to the cold. What you're going to see with these is the skin is going to start out red and then it'll start turning gray, or you may even see icicles starting to form on the surface of the skin. You want to get those areas warmed up. So a warm bath, wrap them in a blanket. Don't rub on it because you'll damage the area, and then get them to a vet. Finally, when you arrive, if you're staying at like a bed and breakfast or a family's home or something like that, check the fences and gates. Make sure your dog can't get out. Practice house training 101. It's a new space. Your dog doesn't know where he's supposed to go potty. So put him on a leash so he can tell you he's got to go. And once he's used to it, then you can go back to just general, let me know when you got to pee. Puppy proof the space as best you can. Maintain as normal of a routine as you can, because dogs thrive on schedules and routines. Double leashing, gates at the or X-pens at the doors to keep them from escaping. This is just my front that I use all the time. I used to have a dog that would run, but you can get ones that have a tension there. Again, you can get these mailed ahead of time to parents' homes or whatever, or you can just use an X-pen. Just so if you've got a lot of people coming in and out, or kids are going in and out playing, you don't have to worry about your dog escaping. Ask where you should walk your dog. Make sure you clean up after your dog. Make sure you're doing proper introductions. Don't just let your dog loose in the yard with somebody else's dog, or let them run loose in the house and just figure they're going to work it out, right? Make sure you talk to a trainer, or there's some great videos on Your Dog's Friend on how to introduce dogs. Make sure that you do that. And then follow pet consent. Again, we've got some great videos on that, but let the dog drive the interactions, right? Your dog is stressed. He's just come off of an 8-hour plane trip or a 20-hour drive. He is stressed. He probably just wants to go to sleep. He does not want everybody running up and hugging him. So let the dog go off, hide, take a nap. When he comes out, he'll let you know when he wants people to pet you. All right. So that is kind of the last of it. Here's some websites, just some places that you can look at. If you want to take a screenshot of this, feel free. Unless I've specified otherwise, you just type in the name with .com at the end. So just bringfido.com, airbnb.com, etc. So places that you can look for when you're looking at planning out your trip. If you have any questions or you're worried, feel free to contact a veterinarian or a trainer that you're working with or someone in your area. And then finally, my contact information is here. Thank you so much for being here today, and safe travels. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen in case there's any questions that we can answer today.
Wow, Kerrie, that was so comprehensive. I think I'm going to stay home though.
Me too.
Um,
Me too.
We had one question so far.
Okay.
Any advice on a dog that whines in the car? She's quite good in acclimating to most things, but she whines when she's secured in the back of the car. She's joined on a few trips already and it's gotten better over time, but she still whines at times, especially in stop and go traffic.
Yeah, that stop and go traffic is the one. My Australian Shepherd, before I had him really conditioned to it, I drove a 16-hour trip with him whining in the back of the car for the entire trip. I do not recommend that. Acclimating, take her on little short trips. If it's just to drive her on the block, back down the driveway and go back. Just the more times that you acclimate them to travel, make sure that she's not fearful. So you might see the vet to see if there's maybe some motion sickness medication that you can take. Don't feed right before the trip, just in case she's getting sick to her stomach. You might try, if you've got her harnessed in the back seat, she may ride better in a crate that's covered. It might be the stimulation of the cars moving that are either calming her because they're going by fast or they're not close on the interstate. But in town, you've got traffic on both sides of you going all the time. So it may be too much stimulation. So I would say try a covered crate, try motion sickness medication, or even make some ginger cookies that are safe for dogs, and feed her one of those before you go, to see if that settles the stomach. And then just practice. And if that doesn't work, I would say leave her at home, because if she's struggling on a trip, then nobody's going to have a good time. So those would kind of be my recommendations for that.
That's good advice. My dog actually was doing that in the car, and we experimented just like you said, and she actually did much better in a car harness rather than being in the crate.
Yeah. You need to kind of see where they're comfortable. I also find that when we do slow down, because he still whines in the car, when we do slow down in traffic, I will, anytime he sits down, I will toss a treat back to him. And then when we're driving on the highway, he lays down and calms down. But it's that stop and go traffic that gets a lot of dogs that are comfortable on the highway. They don't like the stop and go.
There are no other questions. I think that's it. Thank you so much, Kerrie. This was really helpful and eye-opening.